Coming up on today's edition of Women in Money, the shit we don't talk about, our guest is Andie Kramer.
Andie is a lawyer, author, and advocate, and founding member of ASKramer Law, or ASKramer Law.
What we found so fascinating about Andie is that she is a crazy smart in areas of complex law, but Andie is also a lifelong gender diversity advocate, writing and speaking widely on the subject.
Yeah, and Andie wrote 3 books on gender and bias in the workplace, and we can't wait to talk all about it.
So let's jump in.
Gloria Steinem once said, "We will never solve the feminization of power until we solve the masculinity of wealth." Barbara Provost and Maggie Nielsen are the team at Purse Strings that will help you navigate the ins and outs of financial independence so that you can be financially fearless. This is Women in Money, the shit we don't talk about.
Andie, we are so honored to have you on our podcast today. Before we dive in, could you share a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here, and clearly want to talk about some of the important issues for women and men in organizations with purse strings. My name, as you said, is Andie Kramer, and I've been a lawyer for a very long time, probably longer than Maggie's been alive. But I don't hold it against her as long as she won't hold it against me. Had started my practice in a tiny little law firm where they could not have cared if you were purple polka dotted. If you did a good job, everybody wanted you on their projects. And after being there for a number of years, I joined a big law firm. And what I found when I joined the big law firm was that stereotypes and biases are the way that people interact with people they don't know. And so in a large organization, no one could figure out, what am I doing with the corner office? What am I doing with a 2-year-old? None of this made any sense to them. And so either I was obviously a bad mom or a loser as a lawyer. And so I started to get a little radicalized about that. And I can go on and on and on, but I'll stop there to let you have a chance to jump in and see where you want me to go from there.
All right. Well, yeah, this sounds like we have a ton of things to dive into. So let's kind of get started. And so, like you said, you're an attorney and you do very specialized and complex cases. But then you are now writing these books about bias in the workplace, which is really nothing that has to do with the work that you do. So I would love you to share a bit of this connection of what led you to write these books, which I think might just be this experience that you had maybe at this law firm.
Well, I think that that's absolutely correct. But what happened is I managed to serve on the firm's management committee and on the compensation committee, 2 committees that very often they don't let the girls on. What I found when I was on the compensation committee was that the women would write their self-evaluations. I was on the ABC team, and I worked with so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and we saved the clients some money. The so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so, who she had been working with on this project, and she's the one who created and solved the problem for the client. She's the one who created the solution to solve the problem for the client. These guys were writing their self-evaluations. I am a total rock star, and I have climbed to the top of the tallest building, circled around, found as many damsels in distress as possible, rescued them on the way down, saved the client $100 million. You owe me $1 zillion because I am a total rock star. And what I found was that the women were not making as much money as the men. And I realized that there was some disconnect between all of this. Was it that the women didn't get the secret handshake at the beginning to know what they were supposed to do? And so I started speaking and writing about women and their self-evaluations. That was the very first thing I wrote about, which is what women have to own our own accomplishments. No one is going to take a crown and put it on the top of our head and carry us around in a golden chariot. They only do that for the men. So what women need to do is we need to figure out how to do that. And that was the first book, Breaking Through Bias, Communication Techniques for Women to Succeed at Work. And I wrote that book with my husband. Yes.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
You know, easier said than done, right? I mean, when women start complimenting or stepping up and saying, hey, I did this work, this is because of me, you know, it isn't taken very kindly in those boardrooms or, you know, conference rooms. It's, you know, who does she think she is? Why does she think she's so great?
Braggy.
So, braggadocious, right? So what do you what do you say to that?
So aggressive.
Yeah, aggressive.
Yeah, right. He's assertive and gets the job done. She's aggressive.
Yeah.
When he doesn't get the project done on time, he's busy. She's just a loser.
Yep.
She can't manage it. So what I found was that in reflecting on my own experiences and then interviewing and working with many, many other women, I realized that there's communication technique differences between how men and women communicate. And a lot of that has to do with how we're socialized. Mm-hmm. And so as girls, if I'm a little girl and you tell me that I'm a great ballerina, I'm probably going to say to you, but you're a much better gymnast. Because we're trained to deflect the glory, if you will.
Yeah.
A boy, if you tell him he's a great football player, then he's going to be the one who's going to catch every pass because he's great and you're not, and that's the end of it. And so we get socialized in a way that don't get your dress dirty, don't tear your tights, but boys can be boys. And so part of the communication difference is that women, we cannot be acting like men. We have to be acting like ourselves. Mm-hmm. And we cannot talking like a man is not going to solve our problems. But what we need to do is we need to think about, what am I trying to accomplish? How am I trying to succeed in this, whatever it is, whether it's a compensation interview, whether it's getting a job interview, whether it's interviewing my financial planner, whether it's whatever, it doesn't even matter. What am I trying to accomplish? And how can I be certain that the person that I'm talking to is going to actually hear me the way that I want to be heard?
Right.
So that if I've got a guy who thinks that I'm what is she doing here in the first place? I'm not going to be saying to him, you owe me and I'm entitled to. I'm going to find a way of saying, this is advantageous to our organization. And by providing me with or compensating me or promoting me, that's going to allow me to do a better job in advancing the company's interests. And so on self-evaluations, women need to own our own accomplishments. When we're trying to get something from somebody else, we need to keep in mind what's in it for them. What can we do to advance that? And so in Breaking Through Bias, each chapter, we have key takeaways and suggestions and tips as to how to get what you want, basically.
Got it.
How you can communicate in a way that people will hear you.
So it's about having some finesse in these conversations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, when we decided to write the book, the key part that I had been speaking and writing about from the beginning had been the conversations with others, how to deal with being talked over in a meeting, or how to deal with a difficult personality, something along those lines. But when we decided to write Breaking Through Bias, what we did is we divided the book into conversations with yourself and then conversations with others. Because in thinking about how you can communicate better with somebody else, you really need to be self-aware. You need to have what the social scientists refer to as understanding impression management. Boys get that by the time they're 3-4 years old. If they want to be on the T-ball team, they know they have to be nice to the T-ball captain, even if they think he's a fool. Girls, aren't trained that way. If you really hurt my feelings, I'm just not going to invite you to my birthday party. And so that's the whole different way. And so impression management, developing a sense of confidence. We don't have to, there's been a lot of books about how somehow women don't have confidence. And I think that that's just a terrible stereotype. What I think is that women have confidence. It's just that we're smart enough, that we've been slapped down enough, that we're not going to stick our head up too high because we're afraid we're going to get squashed. And so on some level, we need to internalize, what can I do to feel more confident? And we have tips, things, nothing that requires paying extra money for it. You can learn how to develop a sense of confidence by standing up, putting your arms and your legs apart, getting your testosterone up and your cortisol down. We all have testosterone. We all have, the better we can get the cortisol, the fear flight hormone down, the better. And so what we can do is we can have these conversations with ourselves before we interact with those difficult or tricky situations.
Yeah, it's like taking that superwoman pose, or sounds like your book should be parlayed into a workshop. Has anyone done that?
We do all day workshops for for clients and for not-for-profits and whatnot. And so there's various ways to do that sort of a workshop. One of the things is that very often the women will start by saying, well, I don't want the men there because they take over. And the answer to that is, it's better to get the men there and to get them on board. And so what we found is that by doing scenario discussions, it doesn't make it personal, but we can tailor it to the particular organization so that, for example, she's having trouble in this meeting because everybody talks over her. You're the head of the meeting. How are you going to handle it?
Right.
And when men are trying to solve a problem, they're very engaged in trying to solve the problem. And that's a way of getting their light bulbs to go on and say, oh, I really can help make sure that this woman is not talked over, you know, in that example.
Yeah, it's really important for both sides to kind of learn the different techniques of how to bring women into the conversation, and then women to kind of lose a lot of these bad messages they learned as children to kind of stay small and to stay quiet. And so I actually didn't realize that you wrote this book with your husband. And so what was like so important to you about writing this together? As I'm sure you have that male, female perspective, and a couple different things, having that, writing it together.
We've always collaborated together on projects. And so, unlike many couples who say, I love to be married, but not at lunchtime, we always found that we enjoy working together. And when I would come home from work and I would say, you won't believe what happened to me today. And I would go off on, whatever outrageous thing had happened. And Al would say to me, oh, well, what'd you do? And I'd say, well, I did such and such. And he'd say, that's such a girl thing. And I was like, yeah, right. If I had done what you just suggested I do, they would have squashed me and swept me out of the room. And so we had communication back and forth over that. And he had started the law firm that I originally joined. And the men who were the named partners and the senior leaders there didn't have a bias bone in their bodies, but they weren't doing any better bringing women in and keeping women. And in retrospect, that became something that really bothered Al, which was we thought we were doing the right thing, but we didn't do anything better than anybody else. And so we thought that having both a male and a female voice was important because we agree most of the time, but not always, and wanted to be sure that men knew that this is not an issue for women only.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Absolutely.
That's so spot on.
Amen. And you know what? Well, with purse strings, you know, we're always fighting against this male-dominated institution that I always say, or I've heard also other people say, it's built by men for men to sell to men. And there's only like 17 to 20% of women in the industry. That number has not really nudged up very much. And I can see where even when women get in, they don't often stay in because they don't fit into that routine or that, you know, the round into the square peg or whatever. So can you shine a light on what it takes for institutions to really understand that there's this huge female audience that they're just missing out on?
Well, first of all, you've tagged, pointed a number of important things, especially which is that there's a lot of women who are customers, clients, and ought to be considered carefully. But what that did is Al and I had done Breaking Through Bias in another book, It's Not You, It's the Workplace, primarily focusing on what women can do in biased workplaces.
That title I love.
And our third, It's Not You, It's the Workplace.
Yeah, because women, it's always, it's me. No.
It's always my problem.
Yeah, it's not.
Right. But it's systemic. And so that's what prompted us to do our third book, Beyond Bias, which is really the path to ending gender inequality at work. And what this book is about is we're tired of talking about what women can do. They need to do this because the structure's not going to change in their immediate lifetime. Mm-hmm. So what can organizations do? And what we did is we came up with a 4-part program, which we call the PATH program, hence the path to end. So what we do is, I'll give you just an example. Organizations think that they're not biased. Mm-hmm. Organizations, the same way that because there's a masculine culture that is how they were created. And so those standards are what are viewed as the gold standards. Mm. And so what organizations need to do is they need to find ways to break through the biased part of their policies. And it could be as easy as the P for PATH is really about inclusion. And that's something that every organization can do immediately. Start to think about, how can I bring that person along? Who is the one that's the most uncomfortable? The one who feels the most odd duck out? What can we do to bring this person along? And maybe it means the leader of the meeting would say, Maggie, what do you have to say about this? And include people who normally are pushed to the side. Women very often find we go to a meeting and they're all talking about sports. Well, maybe we don't really care about sports. Maybe we do, but maybe we don't, you know. And so, or they banter with each other. There's a male banter. You gained 50 pounds since the last time I saw you, Fred. And as a woman, we're all thinking, I might have gained 50 pounds, but you sure as hell better not say it because I don't want anybody to know. So we're moving ourselves away from the table, away from the conversation, and the men are getting in and bonding. And so organizations can do a lot to make themselves more inclusive, no skin off anybody's back, and it's going to inure to everyone's benefit. Another example, which I'll just real quickly, is getting an interview. The studies show that the men get the interviews, the women don't. Well, you're never going to get a job if you don't have a chance to get the interview. And so an organization could do something as simple as taking people's names off of their resumes, taking factors that indicate what your race is, what your ethnicity is, what your gender is. Just remove those to give somebody a chance, because once I have the opportunity to get the interview, you have enormously better chance of actually getting the job.
There's so much there. I mean, and I think, with all this DEI information within organizations, that people are just checking a box.
Unfortunately, after the Supreme Court case involving, Harvard and equal opportunity, affirmative action, that's become an excuse for organizations to step back. And so what we've seen in the end of 2023 and so far all that we've seen of 2024 is that organizations are using that as a shield to not do the right thing. And that's really pathetic.
Totally agree. It's so hard to see. And so it reminds me though of how, most actually purse strings, I run the whole company, but no, most places, you don't run the whole company. And so it's like, what actions can I take that make a smaller impact, but some impact and make a change. And I remember we went to one women's conference. It was like, every time you go somewhere, like try to bring another woman with you. If that's a new meeting for them, somewhere that they not normally, just, there's always another chair, bring up a chair and just have them at least be at the table and include them in the conversation. That way we can move up the ranks together. It's not just that one spot anymore. There's a spot for all of us. But we need to, put that hand back down and reach back down to bring other people up with us. And so I always thought that was a great action to kind of take, because there's so many meetings where you could just bring another woman with you just so they can hear, they can see what's going on in the room, have a conversation, be part of that, which is so important because we can't change the whole companies by ourselves. We got a lot going on already, as we know, as women. We're so dynamic. We can't add anything else to our plate. But if we're already going to a meeting and just bring somebody else with us to just, bring them up and empower them is so important.
Yeah. And I would add to that, while in the meeting, making sure everyone has a voice. There's studies on how many times women are interrupted or talked over, which is crazy. And even on the Supreme Court, there was a study on how many of the women on the Supreme Court are interrupted or talked over by other members on the Supreme Court. I mean, so it doesn't matter. It happens at all levels. And, really just saying, wait a minute, I don't think she was finished with her thought. Or the whole thing on mansplaining, which has happened to me time and time again. When you bring an idea to the table and someone repeats it louder and all suddenly their idea is so wonderful. So I think, I saw this amazing graduation speech by, and I'm going to forget her name, but she said, all thanks to Taylor Swift, but I'm not the problem. It's not me. The problem is really the institutions and how women inside the institutions really need to help lend a hand and help booster each other up, because that's the only way we're going to really make changes.
And it shouldn't just be women expecting other women to be the ones who bring them along. It's got to be the men too. And so that's really what It's Not You, It's the Workplace is all about, because women very often will say, I'm in this organization and I don't like the senior women because they only care about themselves. Well, it turns out that they don't only care about themselves, but they don't have the power to bring along the other people. And they are worried about their own standing. And so all of this dynamic makes it so that junior women and the stereotypes and biases. A woman might not like you because she thinks that you're not nice enough to her. What she's wanting, she wants the senior women to be her mom, but she doesn't expect the senior men to be her dad. And so we have to overcome those sorts of stereotypes and biases as well. And in your point, Barb, about the Supreme Court, when Sonia Sotomayor went to the Chief Justice and pointed out to him these problems, they changed the policy as the way the Supreme Court operates so that each justice had an opportunity to ask questions before it became a free-for-all. And so they did make a structural change in order to accommodate and overcome that problem.
Purse Strings offers an available for hire network of vetted professionals who specialize in serving women. When you have a life event that has suddenly made money a priority, you can now move forward with a whole new confidence that you're getting advice and services from savvy professionals who are uniquely equipped to serve your needs. Go to pursestrings.co and use our directory of hand-picked financial professionals when you're ready to plan for retirement, navigate divorce, buy your next home, fire up your new business, and more. Go to pursestrings.co or check the link in the show notes. Now you can be financially fearless.
Share a bit about the third book that you wrote, because I know there's one more.
That's the path, the Beyond Bias. And in this book, what we do is we talk to organizations, we talk to men, and we acknowledge the fact that men are not in the conversation, and they need to be in the conversation. And we've researched and found ways as to what holds men back so that we could then suggest to them how they can go forward. Because they say, well, it's not my fight, or it's not, there's nothing that I can do to help. I don't, whatever. And they use this as a way to stay back. One thing that we do, which is outside of the books and outside of my day job, is that Al and I run a mentorship program where we pair up mostly women, but not only women mentors, who want to be helpful to junior women or women who are in transitions in their careers. And we put them together and run this mentorship program. We do it it's remote now, so online. People are from all over the country. So we have people from Canada and some of the other English speaking countries. And we don't charge anything for it. And so we just started our new cadre. We've probably got about 30 or 35 pairs of mentors and mentees. So if anybody who's listening is interested, that's something that you might want to follow up with me about.
That sounds like a great opportunity, as I know it's always great to have another woman kind of help guide you through some of those things, as they've been there, they've seen it all, I'm sure. So to have someone kind of help mentor you.
They got the t-shirt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Make your path hopefully a little easier from their experience.
So let's zone in on the financial industry. So women are coming into the largest transfers of wealth. In fact, there was just the other day an article, I think it was Kiplinger, said it was as much as $80 trillion. And we truly believe women will hold the purse strings of America in not too distant future. However, they've been overlooked and underserved by the financial institutions. Many don't feel prepared for their financial future. What are your thoughts? What advice would you give at this point?
Well, a number of things. First of all, if I were a man in the financial industry, I would view this not as a threat, but as an opportunity. And what I would do is I would look at this and say, what could I do to make the women who could be my clients more comfortable, feel more welcomed? And they ought to read Breaking Through Bias, because it's going to share for them ways in which women feel like we are being put down, and they can learn. They could get the secret handshake about how to do better in dealing with women as their clients. As women, it's an enormous opportunity because there's a lot of women who are going to feel more comfortable in working with a woman. And so there ought to be more women in senior leadership to be the ones who can make certain that the deal gets closed and the client comes in. And so I think that it's an opportunity for men. It shouldn't frighten them, but it's an opportunity for them, but it's also an enormous opportunity for women to advance in the organizations.
Excellent.
Yeah. And I like, for men, sometimes I just don't think they know what their blind side is, or, how women are feeling. If they don't live with a woman or have a sister or something like that who's vocalizing it, you just don't know what you don't know. And so I think that's a great opportunity just to kind of learn something new. As even in this course Barb teaches, we're always like, women don't even want to be like in parking garages. Like if you could have somewhere where we're not like in a parking garage, that would be great. And he was like, what do you mean? Like, what's wrong with a parking garage? It's just like these little things that they would just never know about if you never expressed. But we're like, have you seen any 2020 or 48 hours? Like, that's where women get murdered, And so it's just interesting, those little things where they don't even know that they don't know. And so just getting some of this information is super helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And very often I'm asked, well, if the senior men just age out, is the problem's going to go away? And unfortunately, it's not the case. We have an article in the Harvard Business Review that millennial men are just as sexist as their dads. And so we need to find ways that they talk the game better. They say the right things, but when it comes to actually answering those questions about who do they want to be a president or who do they want as their boss, they're just as sexist. And so we've got a long way to go.
Oh, it's amazing all the things that are enculturated to us as we're growing up and how we behave as we're adults, right? We talk about money mindsets, all the poor money messages women are getting as their young girls are getting, and then we continue to get, women should save, but men should invest, it's all these different money messages. We just have to be very conscious of what's going on around us. And really make decisions based on, is that true? Is that right? Do I want to live my life that way? So any final tips and pieces of nuggets of your brilliance that you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up?
Well, what I'd like to say if there's any senior men listening, they ought not to eyeball the man and ignore the woman when she's in a meeting. That's something that happens all of the time, and they don't even understand or realize, to go to Maggie's point, they don't even realize that they're doing that. And so when a woman goes to meet you and you're going to shake her hand, don't take a puppy paw on her where you take her fingertips so that she can't have a serious handshake with you. You got to treat her the same way you would treat a man. And it'll inure to your benefit. For the women, we have to learn how to say what it is that we need and what we expect. If I'm in a meeting with a man and he's talking to the guy sitting next to me and he's not talking to me and I'm the one who drives the train, he needs to understand that. And sometimes it'll be the other guy who says, Andie's the one who's making the decisions here, or whatever. But there needs to be, we need to be confident enough and comfortable enough to understand that we have a seat at the table and people need to treat us the same way that they treat somebody else at that same meeting.
Yeah, I love it. Spot on. It's amazing how many women still don't get looked into the eye. You'd think that one would be gone by now, but still there, still present.
They walk out of the meeting and the smoke's coming out their ears. But that doesn't solve the problem. If you're there with your spouse or your significant other, he or she ought to know that they ought to be watching your back too, so that it's not just you needing to do this for yourself.
Yeah, it's about, women stepping up and having great men as their alliance as well. So thank you, Andie, for coming on today and sharing your expertise and sharing your books with our community, as I know it's just going to be so impactful for them. So to all our listeners, all of Andie's books will be in the show notes. So be sure to check them out or gift them to your loved ones, as we need to keep, sharing this message. And please share this podcast with anyone else you think is beneficial, as we got to keep talking about this shit. And we'll talk to everyone again soon. So thank you again, Andie. I'll talk to you guys later.
Information is for illustrative purposes only and does not constitute tax, investment, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action.